So Igor, you're not just a regular attorney. You have a background in embryology.
I do. The answer is yes.
Okay.
When I graduated with a bachelor's degree in biology, I was looking for a job, and coincidentally, there was a place across the street from campus in Los Angeles called California Cryobank, and they were hiring. And I ended up working as entry-level andrologist and laboratory person doing a variety of things, including designing the collection kit for the collection storage of umbilical cord, which later was developed into a completely separate business line of the cryobank. But from that point on, I got hooked on assisted reproduction, and sooner or later left for an entry-level embryology position. Climbed the ladder one step at a time and supervised several IVF labs, and after that decided to go into law. So that's how I ended up with about 15 years of practical embryology experience and law school.
Great. So you're involved with a group of patients that are also attorneys that are concerned about how the latest abortion laws set by the federal government are going to affect IVF patients here in Texas.
Yes.
So can you tell me your opinion on that and how you think that law is actually going to trickle down to affect us here in Texas?
There's a lot of fear, and fears in my mind come from lack of understanding of what the law actually says and what it does.
Right.
Laws are not just words on paper. They are directives that may be very narrow in application, may be very wide, and depends on how the law is written. The debate over the Roe v. Wade, whether it should or should not have been overturned, is a debate about the abortion. Abortion, no matter how you define it, doesn't depend on your philosophical perspective. Abortion is a termination of an existing pregnancy. IVF, on the other hand, seeks to create a pregnancy. So in my mind, I'm not certain that fears about limiting abortion or regulating abortion should necessarily be translated into something that limits or regulates IVF, because these are the opposite ends of a process. Creating a pregnancy and then carrying a pregnancy and unfortunately having to terminate it, or it terminates itself for one reason or another. So I'm not certain that abortion and IVF are necessarily and properly conflated in one debate.
Right. So with the Texas Heartbeat Act that was enacted several months ago, I have had patients personally ask me if they should consider moving their embryos to another state that has more liberal abortion laws. What is your opinion on that? And how does that apply, or does it apply to us with frozen embryos here?
I don't think that fear is justified as well. And let's take a look at the law itself. The fear, as I understand it, comes from the fact that there is a definition of an unborn child, which defines the unborn child as an unborn child from the point of fertilization onward. Well, that definition, that concept of defining a child from fertilization onward, appeared in Illinois law, in Texas law. I'm also licensed in Illinois, so I frequently confuse where I am.
Right.
In Texas, in 2003, that's 19 years ago, the penal code, the criminal code, was amended to include the term unborn child, which pretty much defined fertilization as the start of the unborn child's existence. It was 19 years ago. There was IVF in Texas has been unharmed, as far as I can tell. People have been freezing embryos, and no one has been concerned as much as everyone is now. There's nothing new. That definition has been on the books for 19 years. But the way laws are written is something that you don't necessarily understand if you're not trained in law and jurisprudence. One word written in one subchapter of one chapter of one subtitle of one title may be limited to the application of that little subchapter. Think of it as rooms. If you have 5 rooms in your house, and you say the setup for this library is acceptable only for this room. It's not acceptable for the garage, it's not acceptable for the main room, it's not acceptable for the game room, it's just here. And that's how you need to think about the laws. So the definition of an unborn child that applies to just one subchapter, and in the penal code in 2003, there was a specific exemption. So you can't really hold anyone responsible for murder of an unborn child because there's a specific exception for in vitro fertilization. It's in the books. So I'm not certain why people are so much upset about the current change in law when it really doesn't change anything.
Doesn't affect them. Okay, great. Well, I think this clarifies a lot of questions for people because I certainly have had patients asking me, how does this affect us in the future regarding what we decide to do with the embryos, which is a personal decision. But I think that really clarifies a lot. Do you have any more information in regards to the law and how it might affect us, or any useful information for our IVF patients here?
I think, number one, people don't need to panic as soon as they hear something. They need to get to the bottom of the issue, find competent advice, and decide for themselves whether it's something that they need to be concerned about. At the end of the day, the ability to access IVF, to freeze embryos, and to use IVF or assisted reproductive technologies has not been impacted in Texas in any way that I can see. We have very narrow applications of terms. They are applicable only to abortions. Abortions, by definition, require terminations of existing pregnancies within the woman's body. So if you have something outside of the woman's body, even if you call it an unborn child, it is not something that you can abort.
Right.
Because of the definition of abortion in a pregnancy. So words matter, but their application matters more.
How do you believe that this is going to affect other states and the laws regarding IVF with the new abortion laws?
Generally speaking, the law of one state is limited in its application to that state. That's why they're called state laws. And each state is independent, is entirely entitled to pass laws that make sense to the people in the legislature of that state. May be very different from the neighboring state.
Right.
IVF could be an exception to that rule in a sense that the issues that come up in the IVF context are so new, and the legal lingo, the term, is issues of first impression, which means that the court has never had to review that issue. It frequently comes up in the context of embryo custody disputes, where courts in one state have never had that issue before them, and they look to other courts in different states, how they resolve that similar issue. And the courts may or may not accept other courts' decisions, but they look to them. And just to give you an example, there was a landmark case in the mid-90s in California where the issue was whether children of a deceased father had superior title to that father's frozen sperm than his girlfriend, who was his girlfriend at the time of his death. And the court in that case looked to French law and the French court's interpretation of certain issues, not even American. So it is not unheard of that a court in one state may look at the state that's thousands of miles away and say, we've never had that issue. They have.
How did they deal with it?
They dealt it that way. We like it or we don't like it. And if we like it, we'll adopt that in whole or in part. And so anything that happens pertaining to IVF, in my mind, should not be ignored, even though it may happen thousands of miles away, because the precedent and the thinking of either the legislature or the court may be adopted in a different state. And these are unique issues. There are difficult issues for many people. They're emotional, they're filled with unanswered questions. And so I don't think that they should be ignored. People should pay attention to the developments and advocate their positions rather than wait until a law is passed and
just see what happens.
and then deal with the side effects, some of which may not be known.
So just a scenario. Should a clinic lose contact with a patient that has stored embryos? Can't get in touch with the patient, have no idea what to do with the embryos. Does this new law, or could this new law, potentially affect what the clinic is able to do with said embryos?
In my opinion, the law that we're talking about, the Texas law, doesn't change the clinic's approach to those embryos or these situations. Because the legal status of those embryos has not changed. The law is written to apply only in very specific situations in the context of abortion, where again you need to have a pregnancy that is about to be terminated. So my interpretation, and it's not a formal legal opinion, that's just my opinion, that there is no difference now as opposed to May of 2022 how the clinics should approach. And again, as I mentioned, the penal code was amended in 2003, 19 years ago, with a very similar definition, and IVF procedures were exempt from any punishment with regard to the unborn child. So I don't think that the clinics should be worried about, or the patients, at this point. Now, what may happen in the future, I don't have a crystal ball. Healthcare is traditionally something that state government can regulate and control. And if the state government passes a law that consists of one line, such and such treatment is now banned, theoretically they can.
You don't foresee that happening?
I don't think that a state government will pass a law that would preclude thousands of citizens, tens of thousands of citizens, of being able to have children.
Okay.
So just to summarize, whether it's the Dobbs decision or any state laws that, particularly the Texas law that adds a second definition of the unborn child, it doesn't really change how IVF is practiced in my mind, nor does it change how IVF is accessed by patients. So I don't see that healthcare providers or patients should be very much concerned that the new Texas second definition of unborn child changes anything. Now, that is not to say that something might change in the future and additional laws might be implemented, but as we sit here and talk about it, I don't think that there's any reason to be worried.
Okay. So moving forward, what advice would you give to practitioners, embryologists, reproductive endocrinologists, to stay abreast of what's going on and perhaps possibly be able to impact future decisions regarding our practice?
I would make an analogy with medicine that hopefully most of our viewers would understand. Prophylaxis typically is cheaper, less taxing emotionally, financially, and logistically than a full-blown surgery to remove an issue or a problem that has been basically ignored for a while. Why am I saying it? Laws are being introduced everywhere all the time. You just need to pay attention to that and not think that some group somewhere will take care of it.
Right.
Get involved if particularly it's in your state, because it will affect healthcare providers more than patients, because any regulation typically places the burden of compliance on healthcare providers. And you end up with laws that sometimes either make no sense from the scientific point or create ambiguities that everyone is then trying to fill with something meaningful, or use definitions that are out of date. And the only way to fix that is to put your opinion in front of the legislators.
Mm-hmm. Get involved.
And from what I've seen, based on certain laws passed recently, for example, in Colorado, regarding donor anonymity, that places, when the law becomes effective in a few years, places a lot of responsibilities on IVF clinics, in particular. And I did not see among the people who went to testify before the Colorado legislature any IVF providers or lab directors. And that's just an example. If you download the witness list of witnesses who testified when the Texas law was proposed and debated, I also didn't see any names that were from the IVF community. No one came and explain what ramifications a definition may have on a particular industry. Now, thankfully, the law was drafted in a way that it doesn't, on its face, affect, but it could have.
Right.
And if you don't try to fix the issue before it becomes an issue, you wouldn't need to look for a tissue after the issue becomes the issue.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate that advice.
You're
And
welcome.
we really thank you for your time, Igor, in explaining this
Thank you
for all
very
of
much.
us.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you.